Perfect. Good evening. Welcome to the special council meeting of La Crosse Common Council. I'm Martin Gall. I'm the president of the La Crosse Common Council. Mayor Cabot is absent this evening and excused. We also have Andrea Richmond, Scott Neumeister, Doug Happel. That's it. Absent and excused. This evening we are going to, let's see, do we want to handle the suspension first? Is that a yes? Thank you. On the agenda, we are going to deal with the suspension of Council Rule 8 for 2/3 vote for the agenda items we have this evening. So I'd entertain a motion. We have a motion by Councilmember Weaver, a second by Councilmember Jansen to approve the suspension. Any questions? Please cast your vote. For the record, Terry, my screen did not call for me to vote, but I also vote to approve. Okay? This evening, we're going to follow a little bit different method than we do because of the nature of the information that's going to be presented to the council tonight. Before we take any action, Bernie, I'm going to turn this over to you and your folks that you got here right now, and we will get the information that we need to hopefully make some kind of determination on the items that are on the agenda before us this evening. With that, it's all yours.
You're going to want to move. It's going to hit you in the eye. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Gall. I'm really excited to be here. The utility's been working very hard with our consultants, with our neighboring communities to develop a facilities plan and rate study draft. It's been over 4 years that we've been working on it, so it's a really great time to be here and share those highlights with you. We have our consultants here that are going to present to you in just a little bit. This process started, before I was here with Mark Johnson. The driver was the need to meet our phosphate mandate to remove a much higher level of phosphate at the phosphorus at the plant. But the upgrades doesn't just include that. We also looked at our capacity needs, both current and anticipated, for the entire region in a 20-year window. We're also looking at sustainability. We want to use that methane, have that flame go away, and actually put that to work. One of the things I'd really like to see is us get energy independent at the plant, and the engineering calcs aren't final, but that's a real possibility. And then we also have a lot of age and code compliant infrastructure to update. The status is we've completed that extensive planning. We've gotten feedback at a public information meeting on the facilities plan. We've had a couple of technical workshops, actually one even this afternoon, to get feedback from our partners. Unfortunately, we were not there with long-term contract negotiations yet, but I think we hopefully will make progress there as well. The rate study. The sewer has not had a rate study, a rate increase since 2014. So the rate study looks at our needs that have occurred in the expenses and sales in the past year, kind of the changes. Essentially, with a steady rate for the last 5 years, there's some needs. It also looks at the impacts of the debt service for the proposed facility improvements, as well as the impacts of operational costs and savings from those improvements. And again, it presumes that we are all moving forward. So everything that's being presented today is assuming that all regional partners are moving together on this. So to present the facilities plan, we have Donahue & Associates, Eric Lynn, and then from Trilogy we'll follow with the rate study presentation with Christy Dismasters.
All right, thank you, Bernie. Yep, like he said, my name is Eric Linney with Donahue & Associates. I was primary author on the facilities plan, so I can answer most of your questions, but also my colleague Mike Gerbitz is in the audience, so if we have any additional questions, we should be able to answer it. I'm going to try and breeze through. There's a whole bunch of slides here, so slow me down if I'm going too fast, but I want to not make this take more than it needs to. So just a little background on who you hired to do this work. We're your wastewater consultant. We're a wastewater specialist engineering firm. We're headquartered in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, on the other side of the state. I'm actually located in the Twin Cities office, so we're kind of coming at it from both sides, but it's our primary focus is wastewater work, about 80% of what we do, and we're ranked highly in the United States. we even best some of the national firms with the amount of wastewater work that we do. And just a smattering of the different clients that we are involved with, many of them in Wisconsin and with a similar size to La Crosse. So you definitely fit our sweet spot. But we do work from the small to the large ones. So many of the concepts that we've looked at for the facility are stuff that we've looked at for other communities, so we have a good handle on how to apply them. And like Bernie had mentioned, we've been working with the city for a while. So dealing with this with Mark Johnson and Greg Paul, the other predecessors to him and Jared, starting way back in 2008. There was a master planning effort back then that recommended significant capital cost improvements, some of which have been implemented since then, but many of which have not. And most of that is due to the phosphorus regulations were not final at that time. In 2010, those phosphorus regulations became effective in the state, but the city was fortunate in that their permit was not issued until later, and then now we're finally starting to feel the need to advance things. As the city, you had hired us in 2015 to start the phosphorus compliance planning, and then in 2016, due to some capacity concerns at the facility, we were hired to help with re-rating. It was actually unsuccessful because there is a capacity restriction, so we can't re-rate for more until we add these extra pieces. So we then initiated into the facilities planning concept to determine what do we need to do at the plant to gain that capacity and better serve your community. And just a note there that the city has been careful, very deliberate in developing this plan. It's been a 10-year process, and now we're finally getting to the point of we can't delay this any further. So a little about the treatment plant itself. Currently treats about 10 million gallons per day. That's a lot of volume. That's practically a small stream if you were to compare things. Maybe not even a small stream, a big stream, but compared to the Mississippi River, it's a small amount. And average flow. But under peak flow, that gets up to 42 or more million gallons per day. And 29,500 gallons per minute. So if you just think about a gallon of water flowing past you, that's a lot of jugs of milk. We talked about the plant, what it does. It does what it says. It's a wastewater treatment facility. But what its intent is to produce clean water. So rather than thinking about what material is bringing in, think about the product that it's putting out. It's helping protect the wildlife in the river, sanitation, preventing eutrophication in the river, that kind of stuff, providing a safe environment for recreation on the river, all the above. And the way the state does that is by implementing a permit. So the WPDES permit was reissued, and you have a new phosphorus limit that's in that permit. It includes a compliance schedule, which is what we're following along with, and I'll have more on the schedule in a little bit. And just as a reminder, this facility is pretty big, and it's valuable with the concept that there is physical footprint, tanks in the ground, pipes in the ground, and equipment to do the work. And a lot of that has been paid for, and it's still in use, and it has a lot of value, even though there's a lot of work to be done to keep it running. So if we were to look at this as like a brand new community needs a treatment plant of this nature, one would estimate, based on what Denver just did, that this would be over $400 million of an expense. Luckily, we don't have to spend that because you have existing infrastructure we can repurpose and reuse to the best of our abilities. So we're going to try and minimize that. Just another props towards the facility. It is one of the best in the state in terms of efficiency and cost to its consumers. So the efficiency text up there says that it's 572 kilowatt hours per 1,000 BOD treated. It's just a technical term for how its benchmark is compared against other facilities, and that is a very good ranking. And then the cost for annual wastewater fee per year ranks among the lowest in the state, if not the lowest at current rates. So back to the schedule. The permit that I talked about says that we need to have phosphorus treated to a higher degree by 2024, or well, start of 2025, basically. And the current limit is a 1.0 milligrams per liter of total phosphorus. And the future limit is 1/10 of that, so 0.1 milligrams per liter. And the river currently exceeds that future limit of 0.1. So it would be cleaner water than the river currently has into it, but all of the watershed entities are working to reduce that number. So eventually the river will become incompliant. That's the goal. That's what all these studies have been heading towards. And with the overall intent that the Mississippi River's discharge down into the Gulf of Mexico is going to improve. That's what the intent is. Future limit is 10 times lower than the current limit. So it's a big change, and it requires physical improvements at the facility. So how do we get there? Talking with Jared, he runs the facility. He knows that you can't just turn the switch and expect results. There's some time that we recommend for optimization. So working backwards, we suggest or recommend a full year of compliance practice. So giving you time to work through a big storm event, high groundwater, river levels, just giving the staff time to adjust to the new techniques that you have to apply. Makes sense to go through a whole year of implementation or optimization. So that puts us in September of 2023 to have construction complete. Well, construction is not overnight either. This is a major change. We also have other major improvements at the facility that are disruptive and need to be sequenced, so they can't just all happen at the same time. So we're suggesting a multi-year construction phase to make sure that the bid costs come in affordable, because if we could force it to happen all at once, but it'll cost more money. June of 2021 is when we anticipate starting construction. So opening bids in March, backing up further. September of 2020, submitting the plans and specifications to CWF, the Clean Water Fund. So that's the loan agency to get the low interest rate from the DNR of September 2020. Let's see. So right here, we need to complete our design by then in order to get the good funding, free money, that kind of stuff. And then backing up further, we have a detailed design happening in the latter half of 2020. And in order to start our design, we need to have a facilities plan. So the March 2020 says to submit that final facilities plan to the DNR. That is kind of the goal that Bernie had set, that we need to have direction. What are we going to build? So the facilities plan that is finalized in March of 2020 is our current trajectory, because we don't want to do two designs. That's going to cost everybody more money and for no real gain. So we want to have our plan figured out then. And in the meanwhile, between the end of 2019 here and March of 2020, we're going to assemble that revised final facilities plan with the direction we have, comments we've received from the outside entities, any changes that people have on our draft, because our draft is already complete. And then we'll submit that and proceed forward. We've got some more on the preliminary design tasks and components and benefits towards the end of this. And on that schedule, we're showing rate increases recommended by the other consultant, Trilogy, that shows one happening at the beginning of 2020, 2021, and 2022. And they'll talk more about that in a second. So getting into the facilities planning itself, what did we do and how did we come up with the results? So the facilities planning intent is to address regulatory compliance, capacity improvements. We talked about safety improvements, all these necessary things, as well as the cost effectiveness. Bernie talked about the burning our biogas to make electricity. That's not a required component, but it's a cost-effective thing where we can help reduce our operating cost. So here's a map view or aerial view with some depictions of the different colors. So the red shows the oldest parts of the plant, put in 1936, and they're still using a lot of that stuff. They're actually refurbishing some of the digesters, little circles on there right now. So they're planning on reusing them. We highly recommend that when able, and we're going to continue to refurbish that stuff. Moving on to the orange stuff that was put in 1972, that's a much larger portion of the facility, very crucial, and 47 years old. Stuff just doesn't quite last 47 years anymore, so we need to reinvest in that by adding new moving parts, fixing the cracks in the concrete, just as you would your house. And then there's some green boxes and circles. Those are more recent improvements that the facility has undertaken, either by project or by cash funding, but it's been kind of upkeep to the plant for regulations as well as additional capacity or other tasks that have been needed over the years. So the plant is in need of improvements for the next generation. So that work had happened several decades ago. Now we need to do it again. And the nice part is that it's been debt-free since 2014. So any of the later upgrades that were funded by a loan have now been paid off. So you won't have to pay for two loans at the same time, but it does imply that we will need to start paying a new set of debt service. Talked about it before that the facility is worth reinvesting in, and we really like to try and maximize your investment that you do have. So all of our alternatives that we looked at in our facilities plan focused on how can we best tap into the infrastructure that you have, repurpose it if needed, or turbocharge it to make sure it works to the best of its abilities. That way we could minimize new construction. So what do we recommend in the end? Here's a zoomed out view. I don't need you to read everything. Definitely I will field questions, but on the left side is a list of the capacity. We're going to add biosolids processes. So biosolids are the co-product, some would say a waste product, but it's a, if you will, the manure of the process where you need to remove this bacteria from the wastewater process and then land apply it. Well, we're going to add more capacity for that system so that it makes the treatment plant work better. Safety, reliability, and performance, very crucial things. It really brings it up to present day standards. There's parts of the plant that were built decades ago. Codes have changed. Aging infrastructure and equipment. It's the cracks in the concrete and the wore out steel and bearings and that kind of stuff. Many of the things in a wastewater plant are corrosive, and the steel parts don't last as long. Going into the regulations, phosphorus is the one that was in the permit, and the biosolids is a potential regulation change. There's a lot of talk about not letting biosolids be land applied in the community. I think some of the townships have potentially tried to ban it, but it hasn't happened yet. There's other concern with municipal biosolids being contaminated with PFAS has been in the newspaper lately. Other things just in terms of the extra phosphorus that ends up in those biosolids. Is that allowed on the land, or is there going to be a limit put on those? So there's a lot of concern about biosolids, which is why it was a main focus of our facilities plan. So you'll see that biosolids got a lot of costs associated later when we try to deal with those. Resource recovery, we talked about using that biogas to make electricity. So we have a biogas conditioning system to purify that biogas to make it burnable in an engine and make power. That's a task that's been done commonly throughout the United States as well as Europe. And that allows you to harness some renewable energy credits for the electric utility, as well as the waste heat from an engine. Just like your car has a radiator, we can use the heat from an engine to provide heat for the treatment processes. So the map shows the different location of some of these improvements. Overall, adding a new structure down here, and a couple little ones up there and one over here. Overall, no major new facilities or new structures out there. a lot of refurbishment and such. Well, this is what I just said. So the green is rehabilitate, purple's repurposing, and then the yellow is the only parts that we're adding new. So what does that mean in the end? The whole dollar amount on the top there is $55 million. That's a big dollar amount, but there is a lot of work to be done. It's a dollar amount that was commonly talked about 10 years ago. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise, but it is a hefty price tag. Nice part is that it's a larger facility, so you have a lot of flow to divide that dollars among. The pie graph shows a breakdown of the different components of where that money would be split. The red is for reliability, so kind of the stuff you have to do to keep the doors open, or keep the gate open, if you will, for water to come in and go out the back open. Almost $30 million there just for that. And kind of working counterclockwise, the solids improvements is the capacity. So having enough capacity to treat the waste and dispose of it for the projected loads for the future. The phosphorus improvements is the yellow one. That's the regulatory piece. That's $8.5 million on this pie wedge. Some of the other wedges could be associated with phosphorus, but we tried to do a proportional split of how much we felt it was. Sustainability improvements is 7.3. That's resource recovery things that have less than a 20-year payback, so it's worth doing, like the cogeneration engine making power. There's also some things with the heat, building heat. There's a lot of old practices for different things throughout the facility, putting in more energy efficient motors and stuff like that. And Bernie talked about potentially having two different concepts if the facility were to continue as planned or to potentially scale back. We looked at a potential scenario of with and without the wholesale customers just to know the cost sensitivity. Ideally, this project moves ahead with the recommended plan, but we also developed a modified plan that gives the perspective of what the city of La Crosse would be having to shoulder if it was just the city of. So it changes from 55 million to roughly 45 million. And the pie wedges kind of stay relatively similar splits, but the reliability and the reliability one really is the one that changes the most. So talking about a large capital project, here's a graphic of interest rates over time. So going back to the 50s, everyone probably has heard of the 80s when the interest rates were high. Some of you probably lived it. I haven't. But I'm hoping that the rates don't go back there, but eventually it's inevitable that they'll climb from their current rates. Now is a great time to be investing and putting this project into the ground by taking out a large loan while rates are very affordable. If you think about that project in the 70s, that was roughly 75 or so. The rates were 5 or more. It depends on when they locked in the loan rate. That could have been worse than you would have to lock in right now. Just some perspective that it's a really good time to do this project. You're kind of fortunate in that regard. And other people in the state that are trying to delay this, they might regret not doing it now if they wait 5 or 10 years and have to do a big project. The rate from the Clean Water Fund, this is right here, 1.76% interest. You can hardly find a loan for less than that unless your parents are giving you one for free. The rate may not end up being that exact number when it's all said and done because of industry contributions and other things, but overall, it's very attractive. So what's our next step? How do we get there? We talked about the preliminary design, the red portions moving into preliminary design, and then submitting our final facilities plan in March. The benefit of having a preliminary design prior to final design is that we can hone in on some of our costs. So here's a graphic of our ability to control cost. So knowing that it's roughly a $55 million project, we were using a high, here's the other one, contingency, or our ability to predict costs could range plus or minus 30%. Well, now if we go into preliminary layout design, we get more information from the different vendors, we try and find a spot on the site, we figure out what the soil conditions are, these kind of details that helps us hone in on what that dollar amount is. Our accuracy of that cost opinion increases. We're going to have to do these steps eventually, so it makes sense to do them as part of this next few months. And we'll have more certainty that you're going to have the right budget in mind when the rates are set and all kinds of things. Okay, so this is a zoomed in time frame of from October to next March. We've got the little different arrows, the red triangles, is kind of checkpoints along the way. So in October, the staff and ourselves want to go visit some sites that are performing tasks for treatment like we're proposing. As the consultant, we've been involved with several of those types of facilities, so it's not uncommon to us, but we want to make sure that the city staff is aware of what we're recommending, they're comfortable with it, and that it's also agreed upon. And then in December, going into process design workshops, so we'll have more detail then. And in January, it's another level of workshops. February, another workshop. And finally in March, getting the cost refinement. So determining, okay, what's in our final project? How much is it? And what can we afford? And then submitting our final facilities plan, beginning of March, to the DNR so that they have time for public meetings and approval. And with the ultimate goal of finishing our schedule out in 2024 for compliance. So, any questions? Thank you. Yeah. I don't know, do you want to switch the slides to the other presentation? I don't want to mess it up.
It's right on here.
Okay.
We moved every, okay. How do you minimize that? Okay. How do you minimize that?
I don't know here. Let's hit escape. Probably. There we go.
So, I'm not sure where they put the phone.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. I'm Christy DeMaster. I'm with Trilogy Consulting. Just by way of introduction, Trilogy is a municipal advisory firm. We're registered with the SEC and the Municipal Securities Regulation Board, Rulemaking Board. Sorry, I always say that. So we work with municipalities across Wisconsin and down into Illinois on a variety of funding and financial planning issues. The bulk of our work is water and sewer rate studies. We were formed in 2011. Our office is in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. Our other principal, Eric Ranum, is with us this evening, too, in the audience. So we were formed in 2011. I've been personally working on these types of studies since 1997, so almost 22 years at this point. So we were hired by the city earlier this year to work on a comprehensive rate study for the wastewater utility. And a lot of the discussion tonight is centered around the facility plan for the wastewater treatment plant, but I just wanted to say that we did take a holistic approach to the wastewater utility, which encompasses a lot more than just the wastewater treatment plant. So the utility provides conveyance services, so we're talking about all the sewer mains that bring waste in from the individual homes and businesses as well as the partner municipalities. In that system, we distinguish between collection system, which are those smaller diameter sewer mains under 18 inches in diameter that really collect the waste from the individual homes and businesses in the city of La Crosse. And then you also have the larger, what we call interceptor mains, the ones that are 18 inches and larger, that are really more of a system-wide facility that brings in waste from all of the partner municipalities, as well as collecting the waste from the individual collector mains. And then being the topography around here, you have a lot of lift stations throughout the system that are used to pump wastewater uphill at various points on the system. So that's part of the conveyance system as well. And then another big part of it, obviously, is the wastewater treatment plant and those treatment services. And then finally, for those City of La Crosse customers, the wastewater utility provides metering and billing services. So then when we think about who the wastewater utility serves, just kind of throw some terms out here that I'll be using in the presentation. So the first category of customers is what we call the La Crosse retail customers. So those are customers within the City of La Crosse that receive their wastewater bill from the city wastewater utility directly. And they're broken out into different categories, different types of customers. We also have 4 wholesale customer communities that receive one single bill from the wastewater utility and then bill their internal customers from that point. Wastewater treatment plant also accepts hauled waste from septic haulers and holding tank waste and things like that from outside the city. And then finally, you do have a number of industries within the city that have what we call high-strength waste, where they've got loadings that are higher than your typical domestic strength waste. So what we do when we look at a comprehensive rate study like this is we try to make sure that we're being really fair with how we're doing everything, and so each type of customer only pays for the services that it actually uses from the wastewater utility. So this is just a real simple chart here that shows for each type of customer which pieces of those costs they're paying for within the rate study. So starting with the retail or in-city customers, they're going to be paying for almost every type of service that the utility provides because you're taking the waste from the house all the way down to the treatment plant. The only thing that we're not including in the rates for city customers is a new septage receiving station that's planned at the wastewater treatment plant to take hauled waste. So that would be a hauled waste cost. And then moving on to the wholesale customer communities, they do not pay for the collector system because that's really something that's related to individual in-city customers. And they also do not pay for customer costs, which are those metering and billing costs. Hauled waste basically pays for treatment services plus that septic receiving station. And then those industrial surcharges, what that is if you have an industrial customer with waste that's stronger than your typical house, the utility monitors that and samples it, and so they are charged for any additional loadings above what would normally be in domestic strength waste. And then the final column we have here, infiltration and inflow. And there's a certain amount of clear water that gets into the sewer system through cracks in the pipes or water running down through manhole covers during storms and things like that. And so we did figure out the cost of having all of that water coming into your collection system and your interceptors and being received at the plant. And that is something that within the rate study is paid for entirely by city customers. So this is just to give you kind of a general idea of how much waste you're accepting from different sources in general terms here. So those retail in-city customers contribute about 64% of the total volume of waste received at the plant. The wholesale customers communities in total contribute about 23%. Hauled waste is a very small amount of volume. It's less than 1%. And then that clear water inflow and infiltration accounts for just under 13% of total wastewater. Just a little bit of a historical perspective on the rates. The first full, complete rate study was done in 1990. And the 1990 study on through the 2014 rate study were all done by the same rate consultant, John Mayer. He was very kind to give us all of his spreadsheet files to work with, so we essentially used a similar methodology with a few minor adjustments. The city has looked at rates roughly every 5 years, so there have been several rate increases since 1990, with the most recent one being in 2014. And just before that point in 1990, a lot of the cost for the wastewater utility and the treatment plant were paid for from taxes on city taxpayers. So not all of it, but a good share of it was. So the point of this is we're entering a new era where you have to do now a major upgrade and expansion to the wastewater treatment plant, and for the first time, all of that cost will be recovered through user rates. So that is a bit of an adjustment for everybody, certainly. So the reasons for the rate study, one is just that it's been 5 years since the last one, so it's time to look at it again. Obviously, a major driver is the wastewater treatment plant project, and just the need to do some catch-up with increases in other expenses since 2014, as well as adjust those costs to changing patterns in demand and the fact that you're going to be addressing different kinds of things with this wastewater treatment plant project than you've had to deal with in the past. Just a little, kind of the steps in the rate setting process. So we took a kind of a financial checkup for the utility as a whole, first of all. Then we looked at several scenarios for phasing in rate increases. We established a specific dollar amount of revenue that we hope to raise through the rates for the overall increase. Then we allocated all those costs out to those different types of customers and types of services provided. And then finally, we came up with a rate design that would, recover the appropriate amount from each customer class. So we did look back through 2014 to just kind of see what the trends have been with the overall financial picture for the utility. I just want to hit a couple of highlights in terms of the things that we looked at. This chart here shows the blue line is total revenues coming in from all sources, most of which is user charges. There's also some things like interest income and things like that. So that's been steadily increasing, which is good. A lot of utilities we work with have actually seen declines in sales, so this is a healthy thing to have a little bit of an increase there. The red line represents cash going out of the utility to pay operation and maintenance expenses as well as capital, so that fluctuates a bit from year to year. The green line represents net cash flow, and as you can see, it's been pretty much neutral. You're not bringing in a lot of extra cash. You're not losing. You don't have a big negative cash flow. It's been kind of pretty steady. Another thing we looked at was reserve levels for the utility, and the red line there represents what we would recommend as a target level. The blue line represents what you've actually had in reserve funds. So the red line is looking at 250 days of operating cash on hand. That's just to cover, fluctuations in revenues and expenses, emergency situations, things like that. So you're a little bit below where we'd like to see the utility. And this becomes more important once you're looking at taking on a significant amount of debt like you are for the treatment plant, to have some adequate reserves to cover you in the event that something happens. So just in general, I would say the utility is in very sound financial health. It's been very good to not have to be carrying debt up to this point. So you're positioned well moving forward, but we do see some adjustments that need to be made. So next we looked at some different scenarios, and this is just kind of some criteria that we looked at in order to determine what those would look like. The main thing is that the utility needs to, by 2021, when you're applying for your Clean Water Fund loan, you need to show that you will have enough revenues coming in by 2023 when you start the first full debt service payments to cover those debt service payments plus an additional 10% coverage. We also recommend that the utility continue to fund routine capital improvements like main replacements and things like that with cash rather than borrowing for those. Increase the reserves a little bit to those minimum recommended levels. And then we also wanted to see what we could do to mitigate, big rate spikes. So the first scenario that we looked at was no rate increase. One thing I wanted to point out on this, obviously you're not going to be able to finance the treatment plant project without some rate increases. But even in 2020 and 2021, even before you get to the point where you're paying debt service on the project, you'll see that the cash flow is projected to be negative without a rate increase. So there is an immediate need for some level of rate increase, as well as looking towards the future by 2022 or 2023 to have enough in place to cover that project. One scenario we looked at was putting the entire rate increase in place in 2020. This is not a recommended scenario. It would keep the overall rate increase a little bit lower if you do it immediately rather than phasing it in, but you would be building up reserves That's the purple line there is actual projected reserves versus the red line, which is anticipated or recommended reserves. So this one does build up reserves rather quickly, and it would be a pretty big immediate rate increase, so it really didn't meet our criteria. So then we looked at a 3-year phase-in of the rate increase, again looking towards that target of where we need to be by the time you have to pay the debt service on the treatment plant. This one does phase it in a little bit more smoothly for your customers. It ultimately would be a little bit higher rate increase in the end versus the first scenario, but it meets all the criteria that we looked at fairly well. We also looked at a 7-year phase-in. That was kind of the longest one that we looked at, but ultimately you really have to have most of the rate increase in place within the next few years based on the timing of the treatment plant project. To summarize, I think what we're looking at with the 3-year phase-in is that year one, the 2020 rate increase is just more for the general financial health of the utility and to keep that cash flow from going negative over the next couple years. In 2021, we would be looking to update that and adjust it based on having more information from the facility plan at that point in time. And then we would make the final adjustment for 2022 based on even better information about both the facility plan costs and the interest rates. The purpose of this slide is just to kind of give you an idea of where costs have been increasing for the utility compared to where they were back in 2015. And this is comparing the 2015 rate study with our estimated 2022 amounts that the utility would need to generate. All of the 2022 numbers are really based on after the treatment plant project is done. So we've used some estimates of changes in operation and maintenance due to those upgrades, as well as all of the debt service and so on. So as you can see here, operation and maintenance expenses have not gone up and are not projected to go up by very much at all. Similarly, the deposits to the equipment replacement fund, that's pretty level. The big items here where you've seen increases are, that's the big one right there is debt service for the treatment plant. The other area is, another big share of that is those cash-funded annual capital improvements, minor things that are being done at the plant, replacements of mains, things like that. So that's what's really driving the need for the rate increase. But the need for the rate increase is also offset a little bit by those increases in revenues that you've had from existing customers, as well as you've had other increases in interest income and other things like that. So the net dollar amount that we're looking at for the total rate increase by 2022 would be about $3.3 million. Next, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of how that gets divided up between the different costs that the utility has and how, the different customer groups. So this pie chart just shows the total costs that we built into the rate study for everything, including operation and maintenance and capital costs. And so the bulk of the cost for the utility is for treatment. And when I say treatment on this slide, I'm talking about the cost to remove things like BOD and suspended solids and things like that. Another significant share of that cost, moving around counterclockwise there, is just the pieces of the wastewater treatment plant that are designed to handle just total volume of waste coming in. So we refer to that as flow. You've got another piece there for the interceptor system, both lift stations and mains, collector system. That 1% for hauled waste is the septic receiving station. And then you've got about 5% of your costs are for metering and billing. Just briefly, who pays for each of these cost components? The collector system, that is 100% paid for by city customers within the city of La Crosse. The interceptor system is shared by both city customers and wholesale customers. So city customers pay about 77% of that. Outside of city customers, the wholesale communities pay about 23%. Hauled waste and industrial surcharges don't because they're not connected to that system. The component of the wastewater treatment plant costs that have to do with handling total volume of waste is shared based on total volume of wastewater coming into the plant. So again, the majority of that is paid for by city customers. Another big portion of that is paid for by wholesale customers. And then your hauled waste pays a little tiny bit of that based on their share of the total volume. The treatment costs, again, those are paid for based, we did an estimate of how many pounds of each of these different constituents are going to be coming from different types of customers. So again, everyone who has wastewater treated at the plant pays for a piece of that based on their share of those different loadings. And then finally, we have a couple other minor components here. All of those metering and billing, or customer costs, as we call them, are paid for entirely by retail customers in the city of La Crosse. And then, as I said, we separated out the cost for that septage receiving station and are billing that entirely into the hauled waste rates. I just want to touch on this. There were some questions that have come up in past meetings about this question. So what is this routine capital cost that's built into the rates as well? And so we've got about $1.1 million per year budgeted into these rates to allow the wastewater utility to pay for just ongoing replacements of various components of the system. So this just shows you what that's comprised of. And we looked at actual expenditures for the last, like 2014 through 2018, plus the 2019 budget to come up with these numbers. So more than half of that is things at wastewater treatment plant. And then there's also some main replacements in there and collector system replacements, and that general plant is things like vehicles and computer equipment and things like that. So when you go through all of that allocating of costs, this just summarizes out of that $3.3 million that I was talking about before that we hope to get to by 2022. This is how that breaks down between each of the different types of customers. So the majority of that would be paid for by City of La Crosse customers. That's about 70% of the cost in that blue pie. Wholesale communities would be paying about $831,000 of that increase. And then you've got a little bit there for hauled waste and a little bit for industrial surcharges. So what does that look like in terms of actual rates? And again, I'm showing all of the proposed steps in the rate increase just for kind of reference sake. What we're looking for right now is the 2020 rate increase, but just to kind of give you some idea of what's coming up. The flat charge is charged only to customers in the City of La Crosse. That's $15 per quarter. And that covers metering and billing costs, as well as the share of costs related to clear water infiltration and inflow. That's not really caused by any particular customer's volume. So we built that into the flat charges. So we're not proposing any increase in these rates because those costs have increased are not projected to increase very much at all. So we're proposing to leave those the same. And then we have rates that are based on volume of use. So the first line there, domestic sewage, that would be the in-city City of La Crosse retail rate. So right now your customers are paying $1.26 per 100 cubic feet of billed volume. So we're proposing for 2020 that would increase to $1.52, and then ultimately by 2022 we're estimating that would be about $2.05. You have some customers that are unmetered, so they get a charge that's based on typical volume of water per house. The surcharge rates, again, those are what apply for your high-strength industrial customers. So if they're discharging more than BOD than a typical domestic customer, they would be paying for that on a per pound rate, and they're sampled. Again, you have holding tank, septic, and grease trap waste, showing those rates there. And then your wholesale customers on Alaska and so forth are billed actually per million gallons, but we converted that rate into dollars per 100 cubic feet, so you can see how that compares to what we're proposing for the City of La Crosse customers. And that rate is a little bit lower because, again, they don't pay for the collector system costs. They don't use that system. There were some questions raised too about why there's not too much of a difference between that volumetric rate for in-city customers versus the wholesale community customers. So the point of this one here is this, pardon me. This bar right here is the proposed rate for City of La Crosse customers at $2.05 by 2022. This is the wholesale customer rate for 2022 of $1.98 per 100 cubic feet. And you can see all those different bars in there represent the pieces of the system that they're paying for. And so you can see that they're comparable between the two, other than that the wholesale customers don't pay for the collector system. Since the City of La Crosse customers have this additional flat charge that they're paying, the $15 per quarter, that does generate about $1.1 million of revenue per year for the utility. If that was all on the volumetric rate, their rate would have to be $2.42 per 100 cubic feet. So kind of the apples to apples comparison, if you will, would be the $2.42 versus $1.98. And this chart is just showing that, they talked about it, Eric talked about it as well, but looking at peer communities and other utilities in the region, La Crosse rates are extremely low right now. You're one of the lowest in the state. The other lines here show what the proposed, or what the average annual bill would be for a residential customer with each of the 3 proposed stepped-in rate increases. So just for some perspective on that, for the average customer, the rate increase that we're proposing for 2020 would result in about $1.30 per month additional cost for that customer. By the time we get to the final stepped-in rate increase for 2022, that would amount to about, versus what they're paying today, about an increase of about $3.95 per month. So it's pretty minimal. And lastly, I just want to touch briefly on the sewer connection fees and how we arrived at those and what we're proposing for those. So the basis for these proposed connection fees are that you have a debt-free system that has been paid for by prior customers, and it has some available flow capacity left. And so the idea here is that when you have a new connection to the sewer system, you're going to recover the value or the cost of that additional capacity that's available to them. And so it's kind of like a buy-in approach, if you will. So saying that the utility has assets that have been paid for already that are worth X amount, new customers help pay in for that and kind of reimburse the utility and its customers for those costs. So to arrive at the amount, what we did is we looked at all of the original cost of all of the assets at the wastewater treatment plant, plus the interceptor sewers, plus the interceptor. Okay, hang on. So treatment plant plus the interceptor sewers plus the interceptor lift stations. And we looked at the original cost of each of those assets, and we inflated it to current or today's dollars to arrive at that $113 million. So that's our rough estimate of the value of all of those assets. Your treatment plant right now has capacity to treat 20 million gallons per day of average flow. And so the average value or cost of that capacity is $5.65 per gallon per day. Looking at some past history, your average residential customer would be using about 126 gallons per day. So that cost to serve, or the value of those assets needed to serve a new residential customer would be on average about $711. So we're proposing that a new home connecting to the system would pay that $711. If you've got a new business, they would pay a multiple of that based on how much wastewater they're estimated to use compared to a single-family home. So that's that residential equivalent connection concept. And if you look at similar fees around the state of Wisconsin, this is very, very low. These fees are typically, $2,000 to $3,000 or more. I've seen them much higher than that as well. So in terms of next steps from the rate study perspective, what we're looking for is approval of rates that would go into place in 2020, just that first step of rate increases. Again, we recommend that those next two steps be adjusted as costs become more known and interest rates become more known. The connection fees, as I understand, were adopted and set to go into place for the city on January 1, so there's no action required on that front at this point, other than negotiations as part of the sewer agreements. We did not build in any revenue from the connection fees into the rate study, so if those are adopted and once we get a little bit of history as far as what those revenues might look like, those future rate adjustments could be a little bit lower depending on what that looks like. So that's all I have for presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm bursting with excitement. I know this might not be exciting to you guys, but we've been working on this for a long time, and you know it's great to be here and present it to you. I want to thank Donahue. I think we got the best wastewater engineers in the Midwest working for us. Trilogy is one of the best rate consultants in the state. I want to thank Tina for all her work working out these numbers. And I don't know if you guys know the gem we have in Jared. His leadership in this process and what he does for that plant is amazing. In the industry, he's looked up fabulously. So thanks, Jared, for all your work. We are, our whole staff just flows off of Jared and the excitement and the efforts that the whole staff has. So we are excited. This is exciting. I mean, for us, it's as exciting as it gets. So. Kind of next steps, on the facilities plan side, we really got to determine who we're serving for the next 20 years. So that resolution 1358 is really direction to staff from the council and to the surrounding communities about a timeline and what to do if we can't get to an agreement. We also need to get the consultant hired to do our preliminary engineering. So resolution 191268 before you is appropriating the funds and directing us to hire Donahue to do that preliminary engineering that was talked about. We need to get our financial house in order so we're prepared for those loans. So resolution 191269 is the implementation of that first rate increase. That really is to get us ready to submit. We're not at all suggesting that we do rates 2 or 3 at this time. We have to finish the rate, or we have to finish the study, the facility plan, and finish the rate study before we have those hard numbers. And again, this is the first utility rate increase in 5 years. So future resolutions you're going to be seeing then coming down the pike, hopefully, is the contracts with the surrounding communities. And if we don't get to contracts, then some other direction of what to do at that point. In March, when we get the facilities plan done, you'll be approval of the facility plan and approval of that final rate study. And then in that final rate study, we'll have those phase 2 and 3 rate increases. So there'll be a resolution about those phase 2 and 3 rate increases. Those are a little more flexible, kind of like she presented. If we're recommending 1 a year, that keeps those rate increases the smallest. You do have the ability to push those off, but that just means there'll be bigger rate increases down the road. So that's a decision that you'll have to look at. We do have to have a resolution, though, that implements those and has a schedule of implementing them that we can present when we close on the loan, because we have to prove we're going to be able to pay that loan back. So that's kind of the things that you'll be seeing coming down the line. And with that, that's the end of our presentation, and we'll appreciate your time.
What we're going to do here is take a couple minutes to get all this put away so we can get into the meeting. And if anybody has any specific questions for the presentations that were made up here up front, we will do that. If anybody that has anything further resolutions when we deal with them, we will deal with them at that time. But let us get it all set up here first.
Our consultants and our staff will be staying around through the meeting for anything you would like to ask us.
All right. Forgive me for stumbling through this, but I don't get to see these screens very often, and you all know that I'm not very comfortable with them anyway. So, and right now I don't even know what I'm looking. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Anyway, so what I would say right now is there anybody that has any questions from the council for any of the folks that just presented to us in general? Any general questions? And please, if you do, please press your button for a request to speak. Jessica Olson. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was a really good presentation. First off, thank you very much for all of the information presented this evening. I guess it's unfortunate that it's happening at the same time, discussion of this entire three-phase process in conjunction with the legislation in front of us tonight. And I guess I'd like maybe Bernie Lenz to answer, if he can, that just as a clarification, that what we're voting on tonight, since it seems like some of our earlier speakers at the FMP had mentioned a concern about this being rushed through or without sufficient time to review details on some of the proposed changes, that I completely understand and respect the desire to have consultants be able to review the materials. But as far as this larger scale plan and the rate increases going forward over the next 3 years, that's something that they have until the March 2020 deadline in order to come to an agreement with the city on. At least if that's what I interpret this timeline in front of us as, and maybe, Bernie, if you could tell me if that understanding is accurate.
Yeah, the plans presented today are draft plans right now. You know, they were first released June 19th, and we had a public information meeting June 25th on them. So we invited the council, we invited all of our partner communities to that public information, and we had people that did show up. So this report has been out since June 19th. We have had 2 workshops on it, and it is a work in progress. It is until we have the final design, the final facility plan, and the final rate study that we would want to move into those rates 2 and 3. So we have been working with partner communities, we have been taking comments, and we will continue to take those comments. There'll be a formal submittal of the final facility plan to DNR in March, final approval before this board before we do that, and we will have a comment period before that to have written and verbal comments on the final plan. But this draft plan, we've been working together with the communities, to move it forward. And with that, whenever you do thank yous, you forget people. So I always want to make sure I thank Greg Kozelik and the engineering department for all the work they've done, and our partnering communities, because they came to a kickoff meeting for this facilities plan, and they've been at these PIMs and these workshops working with us. So it's been a group effort there. So I was delinquent in leaving them out in my thank yous. Did it answer your question on the timing?
Yeah, it sounds like you do have a lot of meetings in the works where you're going to bring in our wholesale customers, the surrounding communities, and that they are going to have ample opportunity to review and be an input part of the process, that this isn't just the city of La Crosse, that we're dictating terms and conditions and it's our way or the highway. It sounds like you're making a good effort to be collaborative in that sense.
Correct, yeah. Right from the start, with the kickoff meetings through the whole process, we're trying to include everyone. Thank you.
Has anybody else got anything that they would like to make questions on, or any conversation at this point on the generalities? Nope. Okay. Well, with that, then I'm going to move down the agenda, and the first item for consideration is 19-1268. Resolution approving the hiring of Donahue and Associates to perform preliminary design analysis and prepare final wastewater treatment plant facility plan. We have a motion to adopt by Councilmember, Ostrom, and, oh yeah, I got it, and seconded by Councilmember Weaver. Has anybody got anything under discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote. The motion passes 10 to 2, 10 unanimously with 10 votes. The second, let's see, what the heck? Good Lord. The second item up for this evening is 19-1269, a resolution approving proposed sanitary sewer rate increase effective January 1st of 2020. We have a motion to adopt by Councilmember Menninger, seconded by Councilmember Christians. Under the question. Hearing none, please cast your vote. Motion passes with unanimous vote. Next item is 19-1358, a resolution authorizing wholesale wastewater treatment agreements and determination of sewer service area to be included in the final wastewater treatment plant facility plan, and this is notice for closed session if we need one. We have a motion to adopt by Councilmember Ostrom, seconded by Councilmember Podesky. Under the question. Hearing none, please cast your vote. The motion passes unanimously. That looks like the conclusion of our agenda. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Terry, you can sort that out. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We are adjourned. Thank you.